In the scorching desert sky above Afghanistan, where death whispers through supersonic winds and survival depends on split-second decisions, Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez discovered that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shooting at you, it's the one wearing the same uniform. What started as a routine patrol mission over hostile territory became a deadly game of cat and mouse when her own squadron's fighter jets locked onto her Apache helicopter, mistaking her for the enemy. In those final moments, as missiles streaked through the amber twilight and radio static filled with panicked voices, Sarah's infectious laugh cut through the chaos, a sound that would haunt the pilots who pulled the triggers for the rest of their lives. This is the true story of a woman who broke barriers in the male-dominated world of military aviation, only to face her greatest battle, not against foreign enemies, but against the very system she had sworn to serve. Sarah Martinez wasn't supposed to be in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter. Growing up in a small farming town in Nebraska, she was expected to follow the traditional path: finish high school, maybe go to community college, find a decent husband, and settle down to raise children. Her father, Miguel, worked double shifts at the local grain elevator to support his family of 5, while her mother, Rosa, cleaned houses during the day and waited tables at the town diner on weekends. Money was always tight, dreams were practical, and the sky seemed impossibly far away for a girl whose feet were firmly planted in cornfields. But Sarah had always been different. While other children played house or dress up, she built model airplanes and studied the contrails that crisscrossed the vast Nebraska sky. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of military aircraft, torn from magazines she found at the library. She knew the specifications of every fighter jet, helicopter, and transport plane in the U.S. military arsenal. Her teachers noticed her exceptional aptitude for mathematics and science, but in her small town, being smart was sometimes seen as being different, and being different wasn't always appreciated. The turning point came during her senior year of high school when a military recruiter visited her school. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, a weathered veteran with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, set up a table in the cafeteria during lunch period. While most students walked past without a second glance, Sarah found herself drawn to the glossy brochures and posters depicting helicopters in action. When Sergeant Mitchell saw her genuine interest, he spent nearly an hour explaining the various aviation programs available to qualified candidates. "You've got something special, kid," he told her as she peppered him with technical questions about rotor dynamics and engine specifications. "Most people see helicopters as just machines, but you understand they're living, breathing extensions of their pilots. Have you ever considered military aviation as a career?" The idea seemed impossible at first. Women had only recently been allowed into combat roles, and female helicopter pilots were still a rarity. Sarah's parents were initially skeptical, worried about their daughter entering such a dangerous profession. But as they watched their eldest child's eyes light up when she talked about flying, they realized this wasn't just a phase or teenage rebellion. This was her calling. The path to becoming an Apache pilot was grueling and unforgiving. After enlisting immediately after high school graduation, Sarah excelled in basic training, earning recognition as the top graduate in her class. Her physical fitness scores were outstanding, her academic performance was exemplary, and her leadership qualities quickly became apparent to her instructors.
But it was during flight training that Sarah truly found her element.
The first time she climbed into the cockpit of a training helicopter, something clicked. The complex array of instruments and controls that overwhelmed many candidates felt natural and intuitive to her. Her instructors were amazed at her ability to multitask, monitoring dozens of gauges and indicators while simultaneously controlling the aircraft and communicating with ground control. She had an almost supernatural sense of spatial awareness and an uncanny ability to predict how the helicopter would respond to her inputs before she even moved the controls. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes, her primary flight instructor, had trained hundreds of pilots during his 20-year career. He recognized something exceptional in Sarah from her very first solo flight. "Martinez has what we call golden hands," he wrote in her evaluation report. "She doesn't just fly the aircraft, she becomes one with it. Her natural ability combined with her relentless work ethic makes her one of the most promising pilots I've ever trained." But natural talent alone wasn't enough to earn a spot in the Apache program. The AH-6-4 Apache attack helicopter was considered one of the most complex and demanding aircraft in the military inventory. Its advanced targeting systems, weapons capabilities, and electronic warfare equipment required pilots who could think and react at superhuman speeds while maintaining perfect situational awareness in the chaos of combat. The selection process was designed to eliminate all but the most exceptional candidates. Sarah threw herself into the rigorous training program with single-minded determination. She studied late into the night, memorizing technical manuals and emergency procedures until she could recite them perfectly. She spent countless hours in flight simulators, practicing complex maneuvers and combat scenarios until her responses became automatic. Her fellow trainees, mostly men who had initially questioned whether a woman belonged in such an elite program, gradually came to respect and admire her dedication and skill. The physical demands were equally challenging. Apache pilots had to endure extreme G-forces, maintain peak physical condition, and operate effectively while wearing heavy flight gear in extreme weather conditions. Sarah's small frame, she stood just 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 120 pounds, initially seemed like a disadvantage. But she proved that determination and conditioning were more important than raw size and strength. One particularly memorable training exercise involved night operations in adverse weather conditions. Sarah and her classmates were required to navigate through a simulated combat zone while dealing with equipment malfunctions, enemy threats, and rapidly changing tactical situations. While several of her classmates struggled with the overwhelming sensory input and stress, Sarah remained calm and focused, successfully completing the mission while providing covering fire for a simulated rescue operation. It was during this exercise that she earned her call sign Phoenix. After her Apache's main engine failed during a critical phase of the mission, Sarah executed a perfect auto-rotation landing in a confined area surrounded by obstacles. Instead of panicking or calling for immediate rescue, she quickly assessed the situation, performed field repairs using tools and spare parts from her survival kit, and managed to get the helicopter running again. She then completed the mission as planned, emerging from what should have been a mission-ending failure stronger than before. "Like a phoenix rising from the ashes," laughed Captain Jennifer Wong, one of the few other female pilots in the program, as she watched Sarah taxi her repaired helicopter back to the landing zone. The nickname stuck, and Sarah embraced it as a symbol of her ability to overcome any obstacle. Her instructors were equally impressed with her tactical thinking and leadership abilities. During simulated combat missions, Sarah consistently demonstrated an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics and an ability to adapt quickly to changing situations. She could coordinate with ground forces, manage complex air-to-ground attacks, and provide close air support while maintaining constant awareness of threats from enemy aircraft and surface-to-air missiles. The graduation ceremony for Apache pilot training was held on a crisp autumn morning at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Sarah's parents had driven 18 hours from Nebraska to watch their daughter receive her wings and officially become qualified to fly one of the most advanced attack helicopters in the world. As she stood at attention while the silver wings were pinned to her uniform, tears of pride streamed down Rosa Martinez's face. "I always knew you were special, Mija," her mother whispered during the reception afterward, "but I never imagined you would soar so high." Sarah's first assignment was with the 1st Battalion, 25th Aviation Regiment, stationed at Wheeler Army Airfield in Hawaii. The transition from student to operational pilot was significant, but Sarah adapted quickly to her new environment and responsibilities. She was assigned to fly with Chief Warrant Officer 3 Michael "Tank" Thompson, a veteran pilot with over 2,000 flight hours in the Apache and multiple combat deployments. Tank was initially skeptical about being paired with a fresh-faced pilot straight out of training, especially one who happened to be female. The Apache community was tight-knit and traditionally male-dominated, and some of the older pilots struggled to accept the changing demographics of military aviation. However, Tank's doubts evaporated during their first training flight together. "Martinez," he said over the intercom as they completed a particularly challenging gunnery exercise, "I've flown with a lot of pilots over the years, and most of them are either good at flying or good at shooting, but rarely both. You're the first pilot I've met who's equally deadly with the stick and the trigger." Under Tank's mentorship, Sarah's skills continued to develop and refine. She learned the subtle nuances of Apache operations that couldn't be taught in a classroom. How to read the wind patterns over different terrain, how to use natural cover to mask the helicopter's approach, how to coordinate with ground forces in the heat of battle. Tank also taught her the unwritten rules of aviation culture and helped her navigate the complex social dynamics of military life. The weeks turned into months, and Sarah's reputation as an exceptional pilot began to spread throughout the aviation community. She consistently achieved top scores in proficiency evaluations, earned commendations for her performance during training exercises, and was selected for advanced courses in electronic warfare and special operations. Her fellow pilots, who had initially viewed her as an outsider, came to respect her as a valued team member and trusted wingman. But Sarah knew that all of her training and preparation would ultimately be tested in combat. The global security situation was deteriorating, and military units across all branches were preparing for potential deployments to various hotspots around the world. The 1st Battalion had received preliminary deployment orders, and Sarah would soon face the ultimate test of her skills, courage, and resolve in actual combat operations. As she stood on the flight line one evening, watching the sun set over Pearl Harbor, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small farming town in Nebraska to the cockpit of one of the world's most advanced attack helicopters, it seemed like an impossible transformation. Yet here she was, ready to serve her country in the most demanding role she could imagine. "Phoenix," Tank called out as he approached across the tarmac. "We just got word. Deployment orders came through. We're heading to Afghanistan in 6 weeks." Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Everything she had trained for, everything she had sacrificed and worked toward, was about to be put to the ultimate test. She was ready to prove that she belonged not just in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter, but on the front lines of America's fight against terrorism and extremism. The girl from Nebraska who had dreamed of flying was about to discover that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought against foreign enemies, but against the prejudices and limitations that people place on what's possible. Sarah Martinez was about to become Phoenix in more ways than one, rising not just above the earth, but above every expectation that had ever been placed on her. The helicopter blades cut through the thick, humid air above the Arabian Sea as Sarah gazed down at the endless expanse of water below. The USS Bataan, a massive amphibious assault ship, grew smaller in the distance as their transport aircraft carried the 1st Battalion toward their new home in Afghanistan. Sarah pressed her face against the small window, watching dolphins leap through the ship's wake, their playful movements a stark contrast to the grim mission that lay ahead. "First deployment?" asked Captain Maria Santos, a seasoned logistics officer sitting across from Sarah in the cramped transport cabin. The noise from the aircraft's engines made conversation difficult, but the long flight provided ample opportunity for the soldiers to get acquainted with their new reality. Sarah nodded, adjusting the uncomfortable body armor that would become a constant companion for the next 15 months. "Yours? 3rd?" Maria replied with a weary smile. "Afghanistan twice, Iraq once. Each one's different, but they all change you somehow." As the hours passed, Sarah found herself thinking about the intensive pre-deployment training they had completed over the past 6 weeks. The scenarios had been realistic and challenging, but she knew that no amount of simulation could fully prepare them for the complexities of actual combat operations. The intelligence briefings had painted a picture of a dangerous and unpredictable environment where the enemy could be anywhere and nowhere, where a routine patrol could turn deadly in seconds, and where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death for American and Allied forces. Forward Operating Base Chapman was carved out of the rugged terrain of eastern Afghanistan, surrounded by towering mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The base was a sprawling complex of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and military vehicles, all designed to create a small island of American power in a hostile landscape. The air was thin at the high altitude, making every breath a conscious effort, and the constant dust seemed to penetrate everything, despite their best efforts to keep it out. Sarah's first impression of the base was one of controlled chaos. Helicopters took off and landed at all hours, their rotors kicking up massive clouds of dust that reduced visibility to nearly zero. Ground vehicles moved in constant convoys, ferrying supplies and personnel between different sections of the base. The sounds of generators, air conditioning units, and radio chatter created a constant background hum that would become the soundtrack of their deployment. The living quarters were Spartan but functional. Sarah shared a small concrete-walled room with 3 other female soldiers, their personal belongings stored in military-issued footlockers and hanging on simple hooks mounted to the walls. Privacy was a luxury they had left behind in the United States, and personal space was measured in square feet rather than rooms. Her first week at Chapman was dedicated to acclimatization and orientation. The high altitude and extreme weather conditions affected everyone differently, and the medical staff monitored all newly arrived personnel for signs of altitude sickness or heat-related illness. Sarah found the adjustment challenging but manageable, her years of physical conditioning helping her adapt more quickly than some of her colleagues. The briefings during that first week painted a sobering picture of the tactical situation in their area of operations. Taliban and al-Qaeda forces had been increasingly active in recent months, using the rugged terrain to their advantage as they moved weapons and fighters across the border with Pakistan. American and Allied forces were engaged in a complex counterinsurgency operation that required precise application of force while minimizing civilian casualties. "Your primary mission," explained Lieutenant Colonel David Harrison during their first operational briefing, "will be to provide close air support for ground operations, conduct armed reconnaissance patrols, and interdict enemy movement in your assigned sectors. The enemy is adaptive, resourceful, and intimately familiar with this terrain. They will test you in ways you haven't experienced before. Sarah's first combat mission came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against Allied supply convoys, was meeting with subordinates in a remote village about 40 miles from the base. A joint operation involving Special Operations Forces and Apache helicopter support was hastily organized to capture or eliminate the target before he could disappear back into the mountainous border region. The mission briefing took place in a small, windowless room, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. Sarah sat beside Tank as they reviewed digital maps, satellite imagery, and intelligence reports spread across a metal table. The target area was in a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges that would limit their maneuvering options and create ideal conditions for enemy ambushes. "Phoenix Tank, you'll be Blade 27, announced Major Jennifer Walsh, the Operations Air Mission Commander. Blade 26 will be your wingman. Your job is to provide overwatch and close air support for the ground team. Rules of engagement are standard. Positive identification required before engagement. Minimize collateral damage. Protect friendly forces at all costs." The pre-flight inspection took on new significance when Sarah knew they would be flying into harm's way. Every bolt, wire, and component had to be perfect, because mechanical failure in combat could be fatal. She methodically checked the Apache's weapons systems, ensuring that the 30mm chain gun was properly loaded and functional, that the Hellfire missiles were correctly mounted and armed, and that all electronic warfare systems were operating normally. Tank watched approvingly as Sarah completed her checks with the thoroughness of a seasoned combat veteran. "Good habits keep you alive out here," he said as they strapped into their seats. "The enemy gets a vote in how every mission goes, but mechanical failure is something we can control." The flight to the target area took them over some of the most spectacular and forbidding terrain Sarah had ever seen. Ancient mountains stretched toward the horizon in every direction, their peaks capped with snow even in the middle of summer. Deep valleys carved by centuries of erosion created a maze of potential hiding places for enemy forces. Scattered villages clung to hillsides like barnacles on a ship's hull, their mud brick buildings blending seamlessly into the landscape. As they approached the operational area, the radio chatter increased dramatically. The Special Operations team was already in position, hidden among the rocks and scrub brush that covered the ridgelines overlooking the target village. Blade 26, piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Mike Rodriguez and co-pilot Lieutenant Tom Bradley, took up an overwatch position on the eastern approach, while Sarah and Tank established their observation post to the west. "Blade 27, this is Ground Zero," came the voice of the ground team leader over the secure radio frequency. "We have positive identification on the target. 3 military-age males, 2 carrying AK-47s, 1 believed to be our primary objective. They're moving toward a compound on the north side of the village." Sarah focused her advanced targeting system on the indicated location, the powerful cameras and sensors providing crystal-clear images despite the distance. She could see the 3 figures moving cautiously between buildings, clearly aware that they might be under surveillance but not knowing exactly where the threat might come from. "Ground Zero, Blade 27 has visual on 3 individuals matching your description," Tank reported, standing by for further instructions. The next few minutes stretched like hours as the ground team maneuvered into position for the capture operation. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, tracking the positions of friendly forces while scanning for any signs of enemy activity in the surrounding area. Her heart rate increased as adrenaline flooded her system, but her hands remained steady on the controls. "All call signs, Ground Zero. Moving in for capture. Maintain overwatch and be prepared to provide immediate support if we encounter resistance." Sarah watched through her targeting system as the Special Operations soldiers moved like shadows through the village, their movements coordinated and precise. Years of training and experience allowed them to advance undetected toward their objective, using the terrain and buildings to mask their approach. The situation changed dramatically in seconds. As the ground team closed within 50 meters of their target, Sarah saw muzzle flashes erupting from several buildings throughout the village. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed off the mountainsides as the Taliban fighters, apparently warned by a lookout, initiated contact with the American forces. "Contact! Contact! Ground Zero is taking fire from multiple positions." The ground team leader's voice was calm but urgent over the radio. "Blade flights, we need immediate close air support on the compound to our north." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She transitioned from passive observation to active engagement in milliseconds, her hands flying over the control systems as she brought the Apache's weapons online. Tank coordinated with the ground forces to establish precise target locations while Sarah maneuvered the helicopter into an attack position. Blade 27 is in hot, engaging targets in the northern compound. Tank announced over the radio as Sarah squeezed the trigger, sending a burst of 30 cannon fire into the building where enemy muzzle flashes had been observed. The high explosive rounds tore through the mud brick walls like paper, eliminating the threat and creating a cloud of dust and debris. The battle lasted approximately 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity to Sarah. She engaged multiple targets with both cannon fire and Hellfire missiles, coordinating her attacks with Blade 26 to ensure that they didn't interfere with each other's engagement areas. The ground team fought their way through the village house by house, ultimately capturing 2 of the 3 Taliban fighters, while the 3rd was killed during the firefight. Ground Zero, all targets neutralized, primary objective secured. Came the final transmission from the team leader. Thanks for the close air support. You kept us alive out there. As they flew back to base in the fading afternoon light, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. The successful completion of her first combat mission filled her with professional satisfaction, but the reality of having taken human lives weighed heavily on her mind. Tank seemed to sense her internal struggle and offered words of wisdom earned through his own combat experience. "First time's always hard," he said over the intercom. "But remember why we're here. Those guys were planning attacks that would have killed innocent people, American soldiers, Afghan civilians, maybe kids. Sometimes violence is the only thing that stops worse violence." The days that followed established a routine that would define Sarah's deployment. Early morning briefings, pre-flight inspections, patrol missions over designated sectors, close air support for ground operations, and evening debriefings. Each mission brought new challenges and dangers, but also opportunities for Sarah to develop her skills and confidence as a combat pilot. Her reputation within the squadron grew steadily as she consistently demonstrated exceptional piloting ability and tactical awareness. She became known for her ability to place precision fire exactly where it was needed, while avoiding collateral damage, a skill that was particularly valuable in the complex environment of counterinsurgency operations, where enemy fighters often operated from civilian areas. One particularly memorable mission involved providing emergency medical evacuation support for a remote outpost that had been attacked by a large Taliban force. The landing zone was under direct enemy fire, making a normal medical evacuation impossible. Sarah volunteered to create a diversion by conducting a series of attack runs against enemy positions, while the medical helicopter landed and loaded the wounded soldiers. Flying at extremely low altitude through heavy ground fire, Sarah and Tank systematically eliminated enemy fighting positions with surgical precision. Their actions allowed the medical team to successfully evacuate 3 critically wounded soldiers who would have died without immediate medical attention. "Phoenix is developing a reputation for doing impossible things," observed Captain Lisa Chen, the squadron's intelligence officer, during one of their weekly assessment meetings. "The ground guys are starting to specifically request her for their most challenging missions." But success in combat came with its own burdens. The constant stress of life and death decisions, the loss of fellow service members to enemy action, and the relentless pace of operations began to take their toll on everyone at the base. Sarah found herself struggling with insomnia, her mind replaying combat scenarios long after her body had tried to rest. The limited recreational facilities and communication with family back home provided some relief, but the psychological pressure was unlike anything she had experienced during training. The turning point in Sarah's deployment came during what should have been a routine patrol mission in late October. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy activity in their sector had decreased significantly, and the mission was planned as a standard reconnaissance patrol to maintain American presence in the area and gather information about local conditions. Sarah and Tank launched their Apache helicopter just after dawn, the crisp mountain air providing excellent flying conditions and unlimited visibility. Their assigned patrol sector was a valley system about 30 miles northeast of the base, an area that had been relatively quiet in recent weeks, but was known to be used as a transit route for enemy fighters moving between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The first 3 hours of the patrol were uneventful. They conducted several reconnaissance passes over known enemy staging areas, photographed potential improvised explosive device emplacement sites, and coordinated with a ground patrol that was conducting a vehicle checkpoint operation near a small village. It was during their 4th pass over the patrol sector that Tank noticed something unusual in his scope. A small convoy of 3 vehicles was moving along a mountain road that was normally deserted, traveling in the direction of the Pakistani border. The vehicles appeared to be civilian pickup trucks, but they were moving in a tactical formation that suggested military or paramilitary occupants. "Phoenix, take a look at this," Tank said, designating the target for Sarah's observation systems. 3 vehicles, moving fast toward the border. Could be smugglers, could be something more interesting. Sarah studied the convoy through her targeting system, noting the vehicle's speed, formation, and route. The lead vehicle appeared to be conducting counter-surveillance measures, occasionally stopping and scanning the surrounding terrain with binoculars. The behavior was consistent with enemy fighters attempting to move undetected through American patrol areas. Ground control, Blade 27 has 3 vehicles of interest moving along Route Silver toward the border. Tank reported to their base operations center, requesting guidance on intercept and identification procedures. The response came back quickly. Blade 27, you are cleared to intercept and identify. Rules of engagement remain in effect. Positive identification required before engagement. Sarah maneuvered the Apache into an intercept course, using the terrain to mask their approach until they were close enough to make visual identification of the vehicle occupants. As they crested a ridge and dropped into the valley where the convoy was traveling, the situation became immediately clear. The vehicles were filled with armed fighters carrying heavy weapons and military equipment. The identification of the armed convoy marked a turning point in what had started as a routine patrol. Sarah quickly transmitted the situation to base operations while maneuvering the Apache into an attack position. The 3 vehicles had stopped in a defensive formation, and she could see armed figures dismounting and taking cover behind rocks and vehicles. Ground control, Blade 27, has positive identification of military-age males with heavy weapons. Tank reported. Count 15 to 20 individuals, multiple RPGs and machine guns visible. They appear to be establishing a defensive position. The response from base operations was immediate. Blade 27, you are cleared hot. Eliminate the threat. What followed was a textbook example of Apache helicopter tactics. Sarah used the terrain to mask their movement as she positioned the helicopter for optimal engagement angles. Tank coordinated the attack, prioritizing targets based on the level of threat they posed to the helicopter and potential friendly forces in the area. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, but it demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of the Apache weapons system when operated by skilled pilots. Sarah's precision with the 30mm cannon eliminated individual fighters while her Hellfire missile strikes destroyed the vehicles and any heavy weapons they contained. When the smoke cleared, the Taliban convoy had been completely neutralized. Outstanding work, Blade 27, came the congratulatory message from their command post. Intelligence indicates that convoy was carrying weapons and ammunition, intended for attacks against coalition forces. Your intercept probably saved American lives. This successful engagement elevated Sarah's reputation within the broader military community operating in Afghanistan. Word of the female Apache pilot who had single-handedly destroyed an enemy convoy spread quickly through the informal networks that connected different units and bases throughout the country. Ground forces specifically requested her helicopter for their missions, knowing that her presence overhead significantly increased their chances of mission success and survival. But success in combat also brought increased responsibility and risk. Sarah found herself assigned to increasingly complex and dangerous missions as commanders recognized her exceptional skills and reliability. She participated in deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines, provided close air support for special operations forces conducting direct action raids, and flew escort missions for high-value convoys traveling through disputed territory. Each mission added to her experience and confidence, but also to the psychological burden she carried. The constant cycle of briefings, flights, combat, and debriefings left little time for processing the emotional impact of taking human lives and witnessing the destruction of war. Sarah began to notice changes in herself: increased irritability, difficulty relaxing even during off-duty hours, and a growing sense of detachment from life outside the immediate military environment. Tank, with his years of combat experience, recognized the signs and made it his mission to help Sarah maintain her psychological equilibrium. He shared stories from his own deployments, offered perspective on the moral complexities of war, and ensured that she took advantage of the limited recreational opportunities available on base. The hardest part isn't the flying or the fighting, he told her one evening, as they sat in the base recreation center, playing pool on a battered table. It's staying human in an inhuman situation. You have to hold on to who you are underneath all this uniform and equipment. One of the most challenging aspects of deployment was the loss of fellow service members. Sarah's first experience with combat casualties came during a mission to support a ground unit that had been ambushed while conducting a patrol in a remote mountain valley. By the time she and Tank arrived on scene, the firefight had been going on for over an hour, and several American soldiers had been killed or wounded. The medical evacuation helicopter was unable to reach the trapped unit due to heavy enemy fire from elevated positions surrounding the valley. Sarah's mission was to suppress the enemy fire and create a safe corridor for the medical team to extract the casualties. Flying through intense ground fire, Sarah methodically eliminated enemy fighting positions one by one, while Tank coordinated with the ground forces to ensure that her fire was placed exactly where it was needed. The mission was successful. The medical evacuation was completed and several wounded soldiers were saved, but not before Sarah witnessed the devastating effects of war on the young men and women she was there to protect.
That night, for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, Sarah called her parents using the base's limited communication facilities.
Hearing her mother's voice across the thousands of miles that separated them brought tears to her eyes and reminded her of the world that existed beyond the war zone.
Mija, are you okay?
Rosa Martinez asked, her mother's intuition detecting the strain in Sarah's voice despite her attempts to sound cheerful. "I'm fine, Mama," Sarah replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Just missing home." "We pray for you every day," her mother said. "Your papa and I light candles at church and ask God to keep you safe. We're so proud of you, but we can't wait for you to come home." These conversations with family became increasingly important as Sarah's deployment progressed. They served as anchors to her previous identity, reminding her of who she had been before the war and who she would need to become again when it was over. As winter approached, the operational tempo increased rather than decreased. Taliban forces were attempting to establish supply caches and fighting positions before the harsh mountain winter made large-scale movement impossible. This led to a series of intense operations designed to disrupt enemy preparations and maintain coalition control over key terrain features. Sarah participated in Operation Mountain Strike, a week-long campaign involving multiple Apache helicopter units, close air support aircraft, and ground forces. The operation targeted a complex of caves and bunkers that intelligence believed were being used as a major Taliban command and logistics center. The terrain was among the most challenging Sarah had encountered. Steep mountainsides with limited landing zones, unpredictable wind patterns caused by the topography, and enemy positions that were expertly camouflaged and protected by natural rock formations. The operation required precision flying at high altitude in thin air while conducting complex attacks against well-defended targets. On the third day of the operation, Sarah's Apache was conducting a reconnaissance mission over a suspected enemy position when they encountered something unexpected: another Apache helicopter that appeared to be in distress. The aircraft was flying erratically and had visible battle damage to its tail section. "Blade 27, this is Blade 31, came an urgent radio call. "We've taken fire and lost hydraulic pressure. Our flight controls are degraded and we're losing altitude. Can you provide assistance?" Sarah immediately changed course to intercept the damaged helicopter, while Tank established communication with their base operations center to arrange for emergency recovery procedures. As they closed distance with Blade 31, Sarah could see that the aircraft was indeed in serious trouble. Fluid was streaming from damaged hydraulic lines, and the helicopter was barely maintaining controlled flight. "Blade 31, this is Phoenix," Sarah transmitted, using her call sign to establish personal connection with the crew of the distressed aircraft. "I'm going to escort you home. Follow my lead and we'll get you back safely." What followed was one of the most challenging flights of Sarah's career. She had to match the speed and altitude capabilities of a heavily damaged helicopter while navigating through mountainous terrain that offered few options for emergency landings. Tank coordinated with search and rescue units while monitoring the condition of the other Apache's crew through continuous radio communication. The flight back to base took over an hour, with Sarah constantly adjusting her flight path to accommodate the limitations of the damaged aircraft. Several times, Blade 31 nearly lost control completely, forcing Sarah to provide verbal coaching to help the pilots maintain their aircraft in controlled flight. "Easy on the cyclic 31. She transmitted during one particularly dicey moment when the damaged helicopter began to oscillate dangerously. "Small inputs, let the aircraft settle between corrections. You're doing great. Just 15 more minutes and we'll be home." The successful recovery of Blade 31 and its crew added another chapter to Sarah's growing legend within the aviation community. The pilots she had saved, Chief Warrant Officer Dave Peterson and Captain Amy Rodriguez, were experienced aviators who credited Sarah's calm professionalism with saving their lives. "I've got over 1,000 hours in the Apache," Peterson said during the post-mission debrief, "but I've never seen flying like that." Phoenix matched our every movement while navigating through some of the worst terrain in Afghanistan. She's not just a pilot, she's an artist. The successful completion of Operation Mountain Strike marked the midpoint of Sarah's deployment and established her as one of the most respected Apache pilots in the theater of operations. Her combination of technical skill, tactical awareness, and coolness under pressure had been proven in dozens of combat missions, ranging from routine patrols to complex multi-unit operations. But with recognition came increased expectations and responsibilities. Sarah found herself selected for some of the most challenging and sensitive missions being conducted by coalition forces. She participated in operations that couldn't be discussed even with fellow pilots, missions that required security clearances above her normal level, and briefings conducted in secure facilities away from the main base. One such mission involved providing aviation support for a joint operation with British Special Forces, attempting to capture a high-value target believed to be planning attacks against civilian targets in Europe. The operation required flying at extremely low altitude through mountain valleys under cover of darkness, using advanced navigation equipment and night vision systems to avoid detection by enemy lookouts. The target was located in a fortified compound built into the side of a mountain, accessible only through a narrow canyon that created perfect conditions for an ambush. Sarah's job was to provide overwatch while the Special Forces team fast-dropped from helicopters directly onto the compound's roof, then provide close air support if the team encountered resistance. The mission went according to plan until the extraction phase, when enemy reinforcements arrived and began engaging the Special Forces team with heavy weapons fire. Sarah found herself conducting close air support in an extremely confined area, with friendly forces and enemy positions separated by distances measured in meters rather than hundreds of yards. Using her 30mm cannon with surgical precision, Sarah eliminated enemy fighting positions one by one while the Special Forces team fought their way to the extraction point with their captured prisoner. The success of the mission depended entirely on her ability to place accurate fire in a complex environment where a single mistake could have resulted in friendly casualties. "Phoenix, that was some of the finest close air support I've ever seen," transmitted the British team leader as they lifted off with their high-value prisoner. "Your precision saved lives tonight." These high-stakes missions took their toll on Sarah both physically and psychologically. The constant stress of life-and-death decision-making, combined with the isolation of operating at a classified level that prevented her from discussing her experiences with most of her fellow pilots, began to affect her sleep patterns and emotional stability. She found herself spending more time alone, avoiding the social activities that had previously helped her maintain connections with her squadron mates. Tank noticed the changes and made efforts to draw her back into the community, but Sarah increasingly felt like she was carrying burdens that others couldn't understand. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Major Jennifer Walsh, the air mission commander who had briefed Sarah's first combat mission. Walsh had noticed Sarah's increasing isolation and requested a private meeting to discuss her observations. "Phoenix, you've become one of our most valuable assets," Walsh began, "but I'm concerned about what I'm seeing. You're taking on every mission like the fate of the war depends on you personally. That's not sustainable and it's not healthy." The conversation that followed was one of the most important of Sarah's military career. Walsh shared her own experiences with the psychological pressures of command and combat, helping Sarah understand that seeking support wasn't a sign of weakness, but a necessary part of maintaining effectiveness as a leader and pilot. "The strongest people are the ones who recognize when they need help," Walsh explained. "You've proven your courage and skill beyond any doubt. Now you need to prove your wisdom by taking care of yourself, so you can continue taking care of others." Sarah began meeting regularly with the base chaplain and participating in group discussions with other pilots who were dealing with similar stresses. She learned coping strategies for managing the emotional impact of combat and techniques for maintaining psychological balance in an unbalanced environment. As her deployment entered its final phase, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed since arriving in Afghanistan. The enthusiastic young pilot who had been eager to prove herself had evolved into a seasoned combat veteran, with a deep understanding of the complexities and moral ambiguities of modern warfare. She had saved lives, taken lives, and witnessed both the best and worst of human nature under extreme circumstances. Her skills as a pilot had been tested and proven in conditions that most aviators would never experience, but more importantly, her character had been forged in the crucible of combat and had emerged stronger and more resilient. The bonds she had formed with fellow service members, Tank, Major Walsh, the ground forces she had supported, the pilots she had rescued, would last for the rest of her life. These relationships, built on shared danger and mutual dependence, represented a level of trust and connection that few people outside the military would ever experience. Sarah knew that the lessons she had learned and the confidence she had gained would serve her well in whatever challenges lay ahead. She had proven to herself and others that she belonged in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter, but more importantly, She had discovered reserves of strength and resilience that she hadn't known she possessed. As the calendar moved toward the date of her scheduled return to the United States, Sarah began preparing mentally and emotionally for the transition back to peacetime military life. She knew that readjustment would bring its own challenges, but she felt confident that the woman who would return home was far stronger and more capable than the one who had left Nebraska so many years before. The morning of March 15th began like any other at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection of the Apache helicopter as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the barren landscape in shades of gold and amber. The air was crisp and clear. Perfect flying weather. For what intelligence briefings had described as a routine patrol mission over a sector that had been quiet for several weeks, Tank was reviewing the flight plan when Major Walsh approached with a slight frown creasing her weathered face. "Phoenix, Tank, I need to brief you on some changes to today's mission," she said, her voice carrying an undertone that immediately put both pilots on alert. "We've received intelligence about possible enemy movement in Grid Square 47. Delta. Command wants you to conduct extended reconnaissance in that area and report any suspicious activity." The mission briefing revealed details that made the patrol anything but routine. Grid Square 47. Delta was a remote valley system near the Pakistani border, known for being a transit route for Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters moving between safe havens on either side of the international boundary. Recent electronic intercepts had suggested that a high-value target might be planning to cross through the area, possibly with a significant escort force. "Rules of engagement remain standard," Walsh emphasized. "But be aware that there may be increased air traffic in your sector today. We have F-16s conducting training exercises in adjacent areas, and there's a possibility of coordination issues with the airborne warning and control system aircraft." Sarah noted the warning but didn't give it much thought. Air traffic coordination was a routine part of military operations, and the sophisticated identification systems used by modern aircraft made friendly fire incidents extremely rare. She was more focused on the tactical challenges of operating in the mountainous terrain of their assigned patrol sector. The flight to Grid Square 47, Delta took them over familiar territory, rugged mountains, isolated villages, and ancient trade routes that had been used for centuries by merchants, smugglers, and warriors. Sarah had flown this general area dozens of times during her deployment, and she felt comfortable with the terrain features and potential landing sites in case of emergency. Tank monitored multiple radio frequencies while Sarah concentrated on navigation and aircraft systems management. The Apache's advanced avionics suite provided them with real-time updates on weather conditions, friendly force locations, and electronic emissions that might indicate enemy activity. "Phoenix, take a look at this," Tank said, adjusting his multifunction display to show a series of electronic contacts that had appeared on their threat warning system. "I'm getting radar emissions consistent with surface-to-air missile sites, but they're not in any of the locations shown in our intelligence briefings." Sarah studied the display, noting the strength and direction of the electronic signals. The emissions appeared to be coming from multiple locations arranged in a pattern that suggested a coordinated air defense network, exactly the type of setup that enemy forces would use to protect high-value personnel or equipment. "Ground control, Blade 27 is detecting surface-to-air missile activity in our patrol sector," Tank transmitted. "Emissions suggest multiple SA-7 or SA-14 systems in a defensive configuration. Requesting guidance on investigation procedures." The response from their base operations center was immediate. "Blade 27, maintain safe distance and continue reconnaissance. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Intelligence is analyzing your emissions data." For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Tank conducted a careful reconnaissance of the valley system, using their helicopter's sensors to map enemy positions while remaining outside the effective range of the surface-to-air missiles. They identified at least 6 separate missile sites arranged to provide overlapping coverage of the valley floor and main approaches. The tactical picture became clearer as they gathered more intelligence. The enemy had established a sophisticated air defense network protecting something important, most likely a meeting site or staging area for a significant operation. The level of coordination and preparation suggested involvement by experienced fighters, possibly foreign advisors or senior Taliban commanders. "Ground control, Blade 27 has mapped 6 confirmed SAM sites protecting what appears to be a major enemy facility," Tank reported. "This is definitely worth a closer look, but we'll need additional assets to safely penetrate their air defenses." The response came back within minutes. "Blade 27, maintain current position and continue surveillance. Strike packages being assembled for follow-on operations." What happened next would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. As they maintained their observation post on a ridgeline overlooking the enemy positions, her threat warning system suddenly erupted with new contacts. Multiple aircraft were approaching their position at high speed, and the electronic emissions indicated they were military jets with advanced radar systems. "Phoenix, we've got fast movers inbound," Tank said, his voice tense as he tried to identify the approaching aircraft, bearing 270, altitude unknown, speed approximately 500 knots. "They're not squawking friendly identification codes." Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvering while Tank attempted to establish radio contact with the approaching aircraft. The Apache's defensive systems were designed to provide early warning of aerial threats, but they offered limited protection against high-performance fighter jets. "Unknown aircraft approaching Grid Square 47, Delta. This is Blade 27. Identify yourself and state your intentions." Tank transmitted on the standard military frequency used for air-to-air communication. The response was immediate and chilling. "Blade 27, this is Viper Flight. You are in a restricted airspace. Immediately change course to heading 180 and exit the area." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the call sign. Viper Flight was the designation for F-16 Fighting Falcons from the 555th Fighter Squadron, an American unit based at Bagram Airfield. The approaching aircraft weren't enemy fighters. They were her own country's jets, and something had gone terribly wrong with the coordination process. Viper Flight Blade 27 is conducting authorized reconnaissance under operational control of Chapman Base Operations. Tank replied, his voice calm despite the obvious tension. "Check with your controller for mission deconfliction." The response came back almost immediately, and the tone was unmistakably hostile. "Blade 27, we have no record of authorized friendly aircraft in this sector. You are considered hostile and will comply with instructions or face engagement." Sarah felt her stomach drop as the full implications of the situation became clear. The F-16s had been operating under different intelligence than her own mission, possibly as part of a classified operation that her unit hadn't been briefed about. From their perspective, an unidentified helicopter operating near known enemy positions was a legitimate target. "Ground Control Blade 27 is being challenged by friendly F-16s who are not aware of our mission," Tank transmitted urgently. "Need immediate clarification and deconfliction before this situation escalates." The response from their base operations center was confused and unhelpful. "Blade 27, stand by for coordination. We're trying to contact the appropriate authorities." Meanwhile, the F-16s had closed to visual range and were conducting attack runs designed to force Sarah to leave the area. The fighter jet's superior speed and altitude advantage gave them complete tactical control of the situation, and Sarah knew that her heavily armed helicopter would be destroyed in seconds if they decided to engage. "Viper Flight, this is Phoenix," Sarah transmitted, using her personal call sign in hopes that the fighter pilots might recognize her reputation and give her the benefit of the doubt. "I'm Captain Sarah Martinez, flying an AH-6 for Apache, under operational control of the 1st Battalion, 25th Aviation Regiment. Please contact Chapman Base Operations for mission verification." The lead F-16 pilot's response was professional but implacable. "Phoenix, I don't care what your name is or what unit you claim to be from. You're operating in a restricted area without proper authorization, and you will comply with our instructions immediately." Tank was frantically working his radio systems, trying to establish contact with any authority that could resolve the identification crisis. But the military's communication systems, designed for efficiency and security, sometimes created exactly the type of coordination problems that were now threatening their lives. "Phoenix, they're locking onto us with their fire control radar," Tank said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "If they launch missiles, we'll have about 10 seconds warning." Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. The F-16s were demanding that she leave an area where her own commanders had ordered her to maintain surveillance. Moving out of the valley would abandon her mission and potentially allow enemy forces to escape, but staying meant facing possible destruction by her own military's aircraft. The deadlock continued for another 10 minutes as multiple command centers attempted to sort out the confusion. Sarah maintained her position while conducting subtle, evasive movements designed to make her a more difficult target if the F-16s did decide to engage. The psychological pressure was enormous. She had faced enemy fire many times during her deployment, but the prospect of being killed by friendly forces was infinitely more disturbing. The breakthrough came when Major Walsh's voice suddenly crackled over the radio. "All aircraft in Grid Square 47. Delta, this is Chapman Operations. Blade 27 is operating under valid mission orders. Viper Flight, contact your controller immediately for proper deconfliction." The lead F-16 pilot's response revealed the depth of the coordination failure. "Chapman Operations, this is Viper 1. Our mission briefing showed no friendly aircraft in this sector. We're operating under flash override priority orders that supersede normal coordination procedures."
Sarah suddenly understood what had happened.
Flash override was a classification level used for the most urgent and sensitive military operations, often involving special operations forces or time-critical intelligence gathering.
The F-16s were operating under a classified mission that took priority over normal coordination procedures, creating a situation where two American units were operating in the same area without knowledge of each other's presence.
Viper 1, Phoenix, Sarah transmitted, her voice calm despite the desperate nature of the situation.
I understand your mission priority, but I've got intelligence on enemy air defenses that your flight needs to know about. There are at least 6 surface-to-air missile sites in this valley that aren't shown in standard threat assessments. This information got the fighter pilot's attention immediately. Surface-to-air missiles were among the greatest threats faced by high-performance aircraft, and any pilot would want to know about SAM sites in their operating area. Phoenix, transmit your threat assessment immediately, the F-16 pilot responded, his tone shifting from hostility to professional interest. Tank quickly transmitted the coordinates and technical details of the enemy air defense network that they had identified during their reconnaissance. The information was valuable enough to convince the fighter pilots that Sarah and Tank were indeed friendly forces conducting legitimate intelligence gathering operations. Phoenix Viper 1. Thanks for the threat intelligence. We're going to coordinate with higher authority to resolve the mission conflicts. Maintain your current position, and we'll establish deconfliction procedures. The immediate crisis had passed, but Sarah was deeply shaken by how close they had come to a friendly fire incident. The fact that American military units could operate in the same area without knowledge of each other's presence revealed serious flaws in the coordination systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this type of situation. The incident also highlighted the increasing complexity of military operations in Afghanistan. Multiple units operating under different chains of command, with different mission priorities and security classifications, created opportunities for the type of confusion that could easily result in American forces firing on each other. Over the next hour, the various command authorities sorted out the coordination issues and established procedures that allowed both missions to continue without interference. Sarah and Tank completed their reconnaissance mission while the F-16s conducted their classified operation in an adjacent sector. But the damage to Sarah's confidence and trust in military systems had been done. The realization that she could be killed by her own side due to coordination failures was more disturbing than any enemy threat she had faced during her deployment. It represented a type of random, senseless danger that all her training and experience couldn't help her control or prevent. Phoenix, you handled that situation perfectly, Tank said as they flew back to base. A lot of pilots would have panicked or done something that could have escalated the situation. Your calm professionalism probably saved our lives. Sarah appreciated Tank's words, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in her understanding of the military environment. The clear distinctions between friend and enemy that had guided her actions throughout her deployment had been blurred by an incident that revealed the potential for friendly forces to become threats through simple miscommunication. The debriefing that followed the mission was conducted by senior officers from multiple commands, all trying to understand how such a serious coordination failure had occurred. Sarah provided detailed testimony about the sequence of events, but she could tell that the full truth about the classified F-16 mission would never be revealed to her or her unit. These types of incidents are rare, but they do happen, Major Walsh explained during a private conversation after the formal debriefing. The important thing is that everyone involved handled the situation professionally and no one was hurt. But it's a reminder that war is inherently chaotic, and sometimes the greatest dangers come from unexpected directions. That night, Sarah lay awake in her bunk thinking about the day's events. She had survived dozens of combat missions against determined enemies, but the closest she had come to dying was at the hands of American fighter pilots who were simply following their orders. The incident served as a stark reminder that in the complex environment of modern warfare, the lines between friend and enemy weren't always as clear as they appeared. The experience also reinforced her growing understanding that military service involved not just courage in the face of enemy action, but also the psychological strength to function effectively in an environment where danger could come from any direction at any time. Sarah knew that she would carry the memory of that day for the rest of her life, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder of the need for constant vigilance and professional competence in all situations. As her deployment entered its final weeks, Sarah found herself reflecting on all the lessons she had learned during her time in Afghanistan. She had proven her skills as a combat pilot beyond any doubt. But more importantly, she had developed a wisdom and perspective that would serve her throughout her military career. The incident with the F-16s would not be the last time she would face unexpected challenges and complex situations where there were no clear answers or simple solutions, but she now had confidence that she could handle whatever obstacles lay ahead. drawing on the experience and inner strength that had been forged in the crucible of combat. The final weeks of Sarah's deployment had been marked by an increasing sense of anticipation and melancholy. After 15 months of constant operations, the prospect of returning home to the United States filled her with conflicting emotions. She was eager to see her family and sleep in a real bed, but she also felt a deep connection to the mission and the soldiers who would continue fighting after her departure. Tank had rotated home 2 weeks earlier, his replacement being Chief Warrant Officer James Stick Morrison, a veteran pilot with multiple deployments and a reputation for steady competence under pressure. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being the senior pilot despite her relatively junior rank, a testament to the experience and expertise she had gained during her combat deployment. The mission that would change everything began as a priority intelligence gathering operation. Coalition forces had received credible intelligence about a major Taliban meeting scheduled to take place in a remote mountain valley near the Pakistani border. The gathering was expected to include several high-value targets, including commanders responsible for coordinating attacks against NATO supply lines. Sarah and Stick were assigned to provide reconnaissance and potential close air support for a joint special operations mission that would attempt to capture or eliminate the enemy leaders. The operation was classified at the highest levels, with mission briefings conducted in a secure facility and communication protocols that emphasized operational security above all other considerations. "This is the kind of target we've been looking for all deployment," explained Colonel David Mitchell during the final mission briefing. "If intelligence is correct, we could eliminate the leadership cell responsible for half the attacks in our sector. Rules of engagement are weapons-free once you have positive identification of military-age males with weapons in the target area. The flight plan would take them deep into disputed territory, operating at the edge of their helicopter's range and well beyond the reach of conventional rescue forces if something went wrong." Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that preceded high-stakes missions, but her confidence in her abilities and aircraft had been proven through dozens of successful operations. The pre-flight inspection took on added significance given the extended range and high-threat nature of the mission. Sarah methodically checked every system while Stick coordinated final communications with their command post and the special operations team they would be supporting. "Weather looks good for the next 8 hours, Stick reported, as they strapped into their seats. "Intel says enemy air defenses in the target area are minimal, but we should assume they've got man-portable surface-to-air missiles." The flight to the target area took them over some of the most spectacular terrain in Afghanistan. Ancient glaciers carved valleys between peaks that rose over 20,000 feet above sea level, creating a landscape that was both beautiful and forbidding. Sarah had learned to appreciate the stark majesty of the Afghan mountains during her deployment, but she never forgot that the same terrain that created such stunning vistas also provided perfect hiding places for enemy forces. As they approached the target area, both pilots increased their vigilance and began conducting the systematic scans and communication checks that would continue throughout the mission. The target valley was approximately 15 miles long and 3 miles wide, surrounded by ridges that rose several thousand feet above the valley floor. "Phoenix, I'm showing multiple heat signatures in the target area," Stick reported, studying his forward-looking infrared display. "Count approximately 20 to 30 individuals in various locations throughout the valley. Some appear to be armed." Sarah maneuvered the Apache into an observation position that provided optimal sensor coverage while keeping them outside the effective range of small arms and portable surface-to-air missiles. The advanced targeting systems allowed them to observe enemy activities from several miles away, gathering intelligence that would be crucial for the success of the ground operation. "Ground Zero, Blade 27 has eyes on multiple military-age males with weapons in the target area," Sarah transmitted to the Special Operations team. "We can provide detailed targeting information when you're ready to begin your approach." The next 30 minutes passed quietly as the Special Operations team moved into position for their assault. Sarah and Stick maintained continuous surveillance of the enemy compound while monitoring multiple radio frequencies for updates from friendly forces and potential threats from enemy communications. The situation changed dramatically when Sarah's threat warning system suddenly erupted with multiple alarms. High-performance aircraft were approaching their position at extreme speed, and the electronic emissions indicated sophisticated fire control radars that were actively tracking their helicopter. "Phoenix, we've got multiple fast movers inbound from the north," Stick said, his voice tight with controlled alarm. "Bearing 350, range approximately 15 miles, and closing fast. They're not squawking friendly identification codes." Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvering while trying to establish the identity of the approaching aircraft. The threat warning system indicated that the jets were carrying air-to-air missiles and had illuminated the Apache with their targeting radars, a clear indication of hostile intent. Unknown aircraft approaching Grid 4-2. Bravo. This is Blade 27 conducting authorized operations. Sarah transmitted on the emergency frequency.
Identify yourself immediately. The response came in accented English that immediately identified the pilots as non-American. Helicopter in Grid 4-2. Bravo. You are violating restricted airspace.
Turn to heading 180 and exit the area immediately or face engagement. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as she realized what was happening. The aircraft were Pakistani F-16s, part of that country's air force that was nominally allied with the United States, but had complex and sometimes conflicting relationships with NATO forces operating in Afghanistan. The Pakistani government often protested American military operations near their border, and their pilots were known to be aggressive in defending their airspace. Pakistani aircraft, this is Captain Martinez of the United States Army conducting authorized operations in Afghan airspace. Sarah transmitted, trying to defuse the situation through direct communication.
We are not violating your sovereignty and request immediate coordination with your control authority. The response was immediate and uncompromising. American helicopter. You are within 5 kilometers of the Pakistani border conducting hostile actions. You will comply with our instructions or be considered a threat to Pakistani national security.
Stick was frantically working his communication systems, trying to contact their base operations center or any higher authority that could provide assistance with the rapidly deteriorating situation. But they were operating at extreme range, and reliable communication with their headquarters was intermittent at best.
Phoenix, I can't reach Chapman on any frequency, Stick reported. We're on our own until we get closer to base or until someone else can relay messages for us. Meanwhile, the Pakistani F-16s had closed to visual range and were conducting aggressive maneuvers designed to force the Apache to leave the area. Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. Leaving would abandon the special operations team that was depending on her for support, but staying could result in engagement by Pakistani Air Force jets that had superior speed, altitude, and firepower.
Ground Zero, Blade 27 is being challenged by Pakistani aircraft.
Sarah transmitted to the special operations team.
We may be forced to withdraw from Overwatch position. The response from the ground team leader was immediate and desperate. Blade 27, negative on withdrawal. We're beginning our assault and need immediate close air support. Enemy forces are larger than expected and we're taking heavy fire. Sarah could hear automatic weapons fire in the background of the radio transmission, confirming that the special operations team was already engaged in combat and desperately needed the helicopter's support. But the Pakistani jets were becoming increasingly aggressive, conducting mock attack runs that brought them within hundreds of yards of the Apache. The lead Pakistani pilot's next transmission removed any ambiguity about their intentions. American helicopter, this is your final warning. Turn south immediately or we will consider you hostile and engage with deadly force. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Instead of abandoning the ground team or attempting to flee from the Pakistani jets, she chose to continue the mission while using every defensive measure available to avoid engagement with the F-16s. Stick, I'm going to try to provide close air support while staying out of the Pakistani jets' engagement envelope, she said, her voice calm despite the extreme stress of the situation. Monitor their positions and give me constant updates on their location and activity. What followed was the most challenging flying of Sarah's career. She had to navigate through mountainous terrain while conducting precision attacks against enemy ground forces, all while evading 2 Pakistani F-16s that were actively attempting to force her out of the area. The Special Operations Team's situation was deteriorating rapidly. They had encountered a larger enemy force than intelligence had indicated, and they were pinned down by heavy machine gun fire from multiple positions. Without close air support from the Apache, the mission would fail, and American lives would be lost. Ground Zero, Phoenix is engaging targets on the North Ridge. Sarah transmitted as she lined up for her first attack run. She had identified several enemy fighting positions that were preventing the ground team from advancing toward their objective. The 30mm cannon fire from the Apache was devastatingly effective, eliminating enemy machine gun nests and allowing the Special Operations Team to begin their advance. But Sarah's attack runs were being conducted under the constant threat of the Pakistani jets, which were now actively tracking her with their fire control radars. Phoenix, the lead F-16 has missile lock. Stick reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. His wingman is positioning for a second attack vector. Sarah continued her support of the ground operation while conducting defensive maneuvers designed to break the Pakistani missile locks. The Apache's defensive systems provided some protection, but they were designed primarily to counter surface-to-air threats, not air-to-air missiles fired by advanced fighter jets. The situation reached a critical point when the lead Pakistani pilot made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Frustrated by the Apache's refusal to leave the area and convinced that the American helicopter represented a threat to Pakistani security, he fired 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles at Sarah's aircraft. Sarah's threat warning system erupted with alarms as the missiles streaked toward her helicopter. She immediately initiated emergency evasive procedures, launching defensive flares and chaff while conducting violent maneuvering designed to break the missile's guidance systems. "Missiles inbound!" Stick shouted over the intercom as they watched the white-hot exhaust trails of the Sidewinders cutting through the air toward them. The first missile missed by a narrow margin, its heat-seeking guidance system confused by the defensive flares that Sarah had launched. But the second missile maintained its lock on the Apache's hot engine exhaust and closed rapidly despite her evasive maneuvering. In those final seconds before impact, as Sarah watched death approaching in the form of a supersonic missile, she did something that perfectly captured her personality and spirit. Instead of screaming or cursing or begging for her life, she keyed her radio microphone and laughed, a clear, genuine expression of joy that cut through the chaos and terror of the moment. "Well, that's something you don't see every day," she transmitted, her voice filled with the same infectious humor that had endeared her to fellow pilots and ground troops throughout her deployment. The missile impacted the Apache's tail section, severing control cables and causing massive structural damage. The helicopter immediately went into an uncontrolled spin, auto-rotating toward the rocky valley floor several thousand feet below. Sarah fought desperately to regain control of the aircraft, using every technique she had learned during emergency procedures training. But the damage was too extensive, and the Apache was beyond saving. She managed to slow their rate of descent slightly, but impact with the ground was inevitable. "Stick, we're going down hard," she said, her voice calm despite their desperate situation. "Brace for impact and prepare for emergency egress." The Apache struck the mountainside at over 100 miles per hour, the massive impact forces crushing the aircraft's structure and killing both crew members instantly. Sarah Martinez, the farm girl from Nebraska who had dreamed of flying, died doing what she loved most, providing protection for American soldiers who needed her help. The Pakistani pilots who had fired the missiles initially reported that they had successfully engaged a hostile aircraft that was conducting unauthorized operations near their border. But as the full truth of the situation emerged over the following days, both pilots were overcome with grief and guilt. Major Asim Rahan, the pilot who had fired the fatal missiles, requested immediate relief from flying duties and eventually resigned from the Pakistani Air Force. He spent the remaining years of his life haunted by the memory of Sarah's laugh echoing in his headphones as the missiles he had fired destroyed her helicopter. "She was laughing," he told investigators during the official inquiry into the incident. "Even facing death, even knowing she was going to die, she was laughing. I killed the bravest person I ever encountered, and I'll never forget the sound of her laughter." The special operations team that Sarah had died trying to protect successfully completed their mission, capturing 2 high-value targets and gathering intelligence that led to the disruption of several planned attacks against coalition forces. But their success came at a price that none of them felt was worth paying. "Phoenix saved our lives," wrote Sergeant Major Robert Hayes in his after-action report. "She could have withdrawn when threatened by the Pakistani jets, but she stayed to provide the support we needed to complete the mission. Her courage and sacrifice prevented the deaths of at least 6 American soldiers." The incident created a diplomatic crisis between the United States and Pakistan, with both sides struggling to explain how a friendly fire incident had resulted in the death of an American pilot who was conducting authorized operations in support of their mutual fight against terrorism. The official investigation took months to complete and resulted in changes to coordination procedures designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. But for the people who had known and served with Sarah Martinez, no amount of diplomatic discussion or procedural changes could restore what had been lost. Phoenix had been more than just an exceptional pilot. She had been a symbol of courage, competence, and grace under pressure that inspired everyone around her to be better soldiers and better people. Her parents received notification of her death while working in their fields outside their small Nebraska town. The casualty notification officers who delivered the news found Miguel and Rosa Martinez harvesting corn, their weathered hands and strong backs testament to a lifetime of honest labor. "Our daughter died serving her country and protecting other soldiers," Rosa Martinez said during the memorial service held in Sarah's hometown. "She always dreamed of flying, and she lived that dream to the very end. We're proud of her, and we know she's flying with the angels now." The memorial service was attended by hundreds of people, including fellow pilots who had flown with Sarah, ground troops who had been saved by her close air support, and military officials who recognized her exceptional service and sacrifice. But perhaps the most poignant tribute came from Tank, who had returned from his own deployment to pay his respects to his former co-pilot. "Phoenix was the finest pilot I ever flew with," he said during his eulogy. But more than that, she was the kind of person who made everyone around her better. She proved that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. And she did what was right until the very end. The story of Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez became part of military aviation legend, told and retold in pilot training schools and squadron ready rooms around the world.
Her laugh in the face of death became a symbol of the warrior spirit that defines the best members of the military.
The willingness to find humor and humanity even in the darkest moments. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Sarah's memory was the change her story inspired in military training and procedures. Her example of courage under impossible circumstances became a case study in leadership schools, teaching future officers about the importance of moral courage and the responsibility that comes with command authority. Years later, a statue was erected at Fort Rucker, Alabama, depicting an Apache helicopter pilot looking skyward. The inscription read simply, "Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez. She rose above." The statue became a pilgrimage site for young women who dreamed of becoming military pilots, drawn by the story of the farm girl who had proven that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. Sarah's laugh, captured forever in the radio recordings of her final mission, continued to echo through the years that followed. For some who heard it, the sound represented the tragic waste of war and the senseless loss of exceptional human beings. But for others, particularly the young pilots who heard her story during their own training, that laugh represented something else entirely. The indomitable spirit of those who choose to serve, protect, and sacrifice for others. In the end, Phoenix had indeed risen above the limitations that others had placed on her, above the challenges and dangers of combat, and above the fear that might have paralyzed a lesser person. Her legacy lived on in the lives of those she had saved, the pilots she had inspired, and the family that continued to honor her memory by living with the same courage and grace that had defined her remarkable life. The girl from Nebraska who had dreamed of touching the sky had done far more than that. She had shown others that the sky was never the limit for those brave enough to spread their wings and soar.